Peninsula. Peninsula. Face the ocean on three sides. Face the ocean on the three sides. Face the ocean on three sides. Well-known beaches. Well-known beaches. Popular vacation spot. Popular vacation spot. Got extremely crowded. Got extremely crowded. Peak season. Peak season. Near the beach. Near the beach. Geographically, Korea is a peninsula.
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 It faces the ocean on three sides.
It faces the ocean on three sides.
The west, the east, and the south.
The west, the east, and the south.
So, and the south. The west, the east, and the south.
The west, the east, and the south.
So, there are many beaches in our country.
So, there are many beaches in our country.
There are many beaches in our country.
So there are many beaches
in our country.
in our country. There are many beaches in our country.
Many beaches in our country. There are many. So there are many beaches in our country.
So there are many beaches in our country.
I remember going to the beach several times with my family when I was a kid.
I remember going to the beaches several times with my family when I was a kid.
My family. I remember going to the beach.
I remember going to the beach
several times
with my family when I was a kid. Among them, one of my favorite beaches was
on the south coast.
Was on the south coast.
Was on the south coast. One of my favorite beaches was on the south coast.
One of my favorite beaches was on the south coast.
Among them, one of my favorite beaches was on the south coast.
One of my favorite beaches was on the south coast.
It was one of the most well-known beaches in
It was one of the most well-known beaches in Korea.
It was a popular vacation spot.
It was a popular vacation spot.
It got extremely crowded during the peak season.
It got extremely crowded during the peak season.
Crowded during popular vacation spot. It got extremely crowded during.
It got extremely crowded.
During the
It got
vacation spot. It got extremely crowded during the peak season.
It got extremely crowded during the peak season. It got extremely crowded during the peak season.
There were tons of things to do near the beach. Tons of things to do near the beach. Peak season. There were tons of things to do near the beach.
There are tons of things to do near the beach.
There were tons of things.
There are tons of things to do
near the beach. Things to do near the beach.
To do near the beach. There are tons of them.
Crowded during. It got extremely crowded during the peak season.
During the peak season,
there were
tons of things to do near the beach. There were a lot of hotels.
A lot of the beach. There were a lot of hotels.
There were a lot of hotels
and motels
where people could stay at.
Hotels where people could stay at.
Where people could stay at.
Hotels where people could stay at.
Where people could stay at. People could stay at. There were also various kind of bars and cafes. Plus, there were a lot of fast food places and restaurants. Fast food places and places and restaurants
Restaurants that served seafood.
that serve seafood. Once again, I remember going to the beach quite often when I was a kid.
I remember going to the again. I remember restaurants that served seafood.
Once again, I remember going to the beach quite often when I was a kid. I remember going to the beach with my family a few years ago. We went to a well-known beach on the south coast of Korea. We stayed at beachside cabin that had a great ocean view. During the day, we took a walk. We took a walk. During the day, we took a walk along the beach. 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 We also swam in the ocean. Swam in the ocean.
And played in the sand.
Played in the sand. Played
Played in the sand.
Played in the sand.
Played in the sand.
We also took a lot of pictures near the beach. For lunch, we went out. We went out for some food. We went out for some seafood. We had some fish, shrimp, squid, octopus, and crab. For dinner, we had a barbecue at our cabin. For dinner, we had a barbecue at our cabin. We had a barbecue at our cabin. We had a barbecue at our cabin. The food tasted extra good because I was starving. We had some drinks while having the meal. After having dinner, we partied all night long. We drank a lot and got a little drunk. 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 And got a little drunk.
Next day. We had a hangover the next day.
We had a hangover the next day. Looking back, it was one of the most memorable trips in my life. It was worth the money and time. 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 Well-known beach. Stay at beachside cabin. Stayed at beachside cabin. Have a great ocean view. Took a walk along the beach. Swam in the ocean. Near the beach. Had a barbecue. Starving. Got a little drunk. I remember going to the beach with my family a few years ago. We went to a well-known beach on the south coast of Korea. We stayed at a beachside cabin that had a great ocean view. That had a beachside cabin that had a great ocean view. During the day, we took a walk along the beach. We also swam in the ocean. We also swam in the ocean and played in Played
We
in
also
the
swam
sand.
in the ocean and played in the sand.
Played in the sand. Played in the sand. We also took a lot of pictures near the beach.
Pictures.
We also took a
We
lot
also
of
took a
pictures
lot of pictures
near the beach.
For lunch.
For lunch, we went out for some seafood. We went out. We went out. We went out. We went out. We went out.
We went out for some seafood.
We went out for some seafood. We went out for some seafood.
We went out for some seafood.
We had some fish, shrimp, squid, octopus, and the crab. For dinner, we had a barbecue at our cabin. At our cabin. We had a barbecue at our cabin. We had a barbecue at our cabin. The food tasted extra good because I was starving. We had some drinks while having the meal. After having dinner, we partied all night long. We partied all night long. We drank a lot and got a little drunk. We had a hangover the next day. After having dinner, we partied all night long. After having dinner, we partied all night long. We drank a lot and got a little drunk. We had a hangover the next day. We had a hangover the next day. We had a hangover the next day. Looking back, it was one of the most memorable trips in my life. It was one of the most memorable trips in my life. It was worth the money and time. Korea has changed a lot over the last decade. Korea has changed a lot over the last decade.
Korea has changed a lot over the last decade.
Korea has changed a lot over the last decade.
One of the biggest changes
is transportation. Transportation has become a lot better over the years. A lot better over the years. For example, in the past, trains used to be slower, but now they have become much faster than in the past. That's because there are now bullet trains. There are now bullet trains that are twice as fast. It takes half the time to get somewhere now. It takes half the time to get somewhere now. It takes half the time to get somewhere now. It takes half the time to get somewhere now. Plus, in the past, plane tickets used to be very pricey, but now plane tickets have become much cheaper thanks to low-cost carriers. Some flights only cost half the price. Next, back in the day, we used to use paper maps when we drove, but these days, driving has become much easier because we have GPS. We now have a GPS. The GPS tells us where to go, so we do not get lost that often.
Get lost that often. GPS tells us where to go, so we do not get lost that often.
So we do not get lost that often. So we do not get lost that often. The GPS tells us where to go, so we do not get lost that often. Once again, one of the biggest changes is transportation. Transportation has become a lot better. Over the last 10 years. Over the last decade.
transportation has become
Over the last decade, transportation, bullet trains, twice as fast, take half the time. Plane tickets, pricey, low cost carriers, cost half the price. GPS, where to go? Do not get lost. Do not get lost that often. GPS tells us where to go. Tells us where to go. The GPS tells us where to go, so we do not get lost that often.
between the Korea and Japan have a
Korea and
very
Japan
long
have a very long
and complicated
and
history.
complicated history.
Long and complicated history.
Complicated history. Relations between the two countries have gone through many ups and downs. Relations between the two countries have gone through many ups and downs. Relations between the two countries have gone through many ups and downs. Back in the early 1900s, 1900s, Japan occupied Korea for 36 years. It committed numerous war crimes. It committed numerous war crimes during its occupation. Many of them were crimes against humanity. Many of them were crimes against humanity. Nevertheless, Japan has not fully apologized for its wrongdoings. In recent months, relations between the two countries have become extremely bad. Korea's Supreme Court ruled that Japanese companies should compensate Korean victims. Japanese companies Korea's Supreme Court ruled that Japanese companies should compensate Korean victims. Japan strongly opposed the ruling and imposed trade sanctions on Korea. Sanctions on Korea. Imposed trade sanctions on Korea. Imposed trade sanctions on Korea. Korea retaliated by imposing sanctions of the Korea retaliated by imposing sanctions of its own. Meanwhile, Korean people started to boycott Japanese products and canceled trips to Japan. The two nations currently have a big conflict over this matter. In fact, bilateral relations In fact, bilateral relations are at their worst. I recently saw many news reports about this issue. They give me more insight about the relationship between Korea and Japan. Long and complicated history have gone through many ups and downs. Occupation, committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, has not apologized for its wrongdoings, has not apologized for its Supreme Court rule compensate ruling imposed trade sanctions retaliate boycott Japanese products have a big conflict bilateral relations. Korea and Japan have a very long and complicated history. Relations between two countries have gone through many ups and downs. Back in the early 1900s, Japan occupied Korea for 36 years. For 36 years, it committed numerous war crimes during its occupation. Many of them were crimes against humanity. Nevertheless, Japan has not fully apologized for its wrongdoings. In recent months, relations between two countries have become extremely bad. Korea's Supreme Court ruled that Japanese companies should compensate Korean victims. Japan strongly opposed the ruling. And imposed trade sanctions on Korea. Korea retaliated by imposing sanctions of its own. Korea retaliated
Imposing sanctions of its own.
Imposes-
Of its own.
imposing sanctions of its own. Sanctions of its own.
And Korea retaliated.
Korea retaliated. Korea retaliated.
Those trade sanctions on Korea. Korea retaliated by imposing
Imposing-
sanctions
by imposing sanctions of its own. Meanwhile, Korean people started to boycott Japanese products and canceled trips to Japan.
trips to Japan.
The two nations currently have a big conflict
over this matter.
Big conflict over this matter.
In
In fact,
bilateral relations
bilateral relations, bilateral
in fact over this matter.
bilateral
Bilateral relations
bilateral relations
at their worst.
are at their worst. I recently saw many news reports about this issue. They gave me more insight about the relationship between Korea and Japan. Let me talk about North and South Korea. Let me talk about North and South Korea.
To give you some background,
To give you some background, a major turning point in Korean history was the Korean War. Back in 1950, a war broke out between the North and the South.
and the South.
Between the North
The North and the South.
and the South.
The war
The war
lasted for three. The war lasted for three.
lasted
The war
for
lasted for
the war lasted for 3 years, and millions of people lost their lives.
lost their lives.
Lost their
The
lives.
two
The two sides signed a ceasefire
ceasefire
treaty in
1953.
1953. Two sides signed
1953 treaty in 19 a ceasefire treaty in 9 the people lost theirs and millions of people
lost their lives.
The two sides signed a cease.
Two sides signed a ceasefire
The two
treaty.
sides signed a ceasefire treaty
Ceasefire treaty
in 1953.
in 1953. Due to this war, Korea is still divided.
Korea is still
divided into
North
North
and South Korea.
and South Korea. Into
Into North and South Korea.
into North and South Korea.
North Korea heavily invests in its military power,
and so does South Korea.
More
More
recently,
recently,
however, there have been efforts to bring
diplomatic efforts
diplomatic efforts to
to
bring peace.
bring peace.
There were
several inter-Korean summits. There were several
inter-Korean summits, which were inter-Korean summits efforts to bring peace.
There were several inter-Korean summits which were historic.
They were aimed at
They were-
the
They were aimed at
denuclearization
denuclearizations. They were aimed at
They were aimed at the denuclearization.
they were aimed at that they were aimed at the denuclearizations of the Korean Peninsula. Korean Peninsula.
The leaders of
The leaders of North Korea and the US also met 3 times at summit meetings.
They
They even met at the DMZ when President Trump visited Korea. visited Korea. However, talks are still going on
Talks are still going on to reach an
to reach an agreement. But negotiations have not been going well in the past few months. In fact, North Korea has been conducting weapon tests again, and tensions are rising. Eventually, the final goal is bring long-lasting peace to the Korean Peninsula.
Peace to the Korean Peninsula.
Peninsula.
Peace to the Korean Peninsula.
Korean Peninsula.